The top stories from the Sky Newsroom. The best days lie ahead. The Chancellor Rachel Reeves talks up the economy ahead of her budget next month.
Believe me when I say, my optimism for Britain burns brighter than ever. My ambition knows no limits.
Did business leaders like what they heard from the Chancellor? I'll be joined by the Chief Executive of the CBI. Plus, an American billionaire agrees to buy Everton 2 months after pulling out of takeover talks. Hello, very good afternoon. This is Business Live with me, Anna Jones. Our top story here this afternoon, Rachel Reeves has promised there'll be no return to austerity as she addressed the Labour Party conference for the first time as Chancellor. She said the budget next month would be used to rebuild Britain as she attempted to inject some optimism into the doom and gloom currently surrounding the economy. So let's get a take on this. Joining me now is NewtonSmith, who's the Chief Executive of the CBI. A very good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us. You, of course, represent businesses across the country. So what did you make of Rachel Reeves' speech earlier on today?
Well, it was quite a moment to be in the front row and hear the UK's first female Chancellor deliver her pitch to the nation and obviously also to the delegates here. But I think she did strike the right balance of being optimistic for the future and yet also being clear there are fiscal challenges, but the solution to that is growth. And the way that we get growth is getting investment going. And I think she did reassure business leaders here that she is absolutely determined to work with business to make sure we unlock investment and get jobs and growth around the UK.
And a lot has been made of this shift in tone to a more optimistic approach. But it's always nice to hear positivity, of course. But does that in itself make a difference to business?
Absolutely it does, because positivity, confidence, hope, optimism feeds into consumer confidence, it feeds into business confidence. And I think like any organisation, you need to have a vision of where you want to get to for your strategy to deliver. So I think it absolutely does matter. But I think we also heard from the Chancellor today her determination to ensure that our overall level of corporation tax would remain competitive, that she would make sure that we had the right incentives to encourage investment in the UK. So I think we heard a lot of the things that businesses were looking for. She also talked a lot about some of the new technologies we're going to need to see to deliver our transition to a net zero economy, so carbon capture, usage and storage. And I think just hearing some of the commitment from her to that was really important. I'm sure there's going to be challenges ahead, but she managed to strike the tone today that she would be a Chancellor who would absolutely deliver a bedrock of fiscal stability, but that she was determined to make tough choices, but also really work in partnership with business to deliver the growth that this country needs.
Well, yes, and as you say, that was her message. She said that growth is the challenge and investment is the solution. Are you seeing tangible steps, though, to address that issue of investment? And if not, what do you need to see to make sure it happens?
Well, one of the things she said that would be delivered in the coming months would be the industrial strategy. So that's the long-term vision on how we get growth going around the UK. And to our mind, that really needs to have a focus on some of the infrastructure we need that really enables growth, whether that's aviation or transport, the things that connect us and our communities around the UK. And I think as well, the Chancellor set out today, I think she gave a signal that she would be willing to look not just at the costs of investment, but the benefits that it brings to our communities and to our businesses. And I think that is a shift in tone and could mean that there's more space for the Chancellor to invest in public investment, which helps unlock the private sector investment that we know we need to see. And the other elements, of course, are making sure we have access to skills and talent from around the world and also innovation to really drive the growth and productivity.
And she vowed, didn't she, that there'd be no return to austerity, but she did also say that if the books aren't balanced, we face economic ruin. To what extent is she signalling, do you think, that business will have to play its part in filling this economic black hole? Are you fearful of higher taxes?
I think what we saw today is a shift more towards the future and not just talking about the challenging fiscal circumstances, though I think everyone is honest. It's not a moment where we're going to be able to see a massive increase in public spending as a proportion of GDP. From where we are now, we need to deliver growth, which will help to drive the increases in tax revenue, which then feeds the investment. So I think we know that the fiscal picture is challenging, and I think what businesses also heard from her today is a recommitment to her business tax roadmap, that she would have that stability, and also an eye to how we are globally competitive, because that's what really matters. This is a global game, how we attract investment here in the UK. So most of the business leaders that I've spoken to today definitely notice a shift in the mood of optimism, though of course they're level-headed and know that there could be challenges ahead. But what we do know is the moment I think where we'll see some of that delivery will be at the end of October when the Chancellor delivers her budget.
And we heard the Chancellor talking a lot about this being a pro-business government, but she also made it clear that this is the party of working people. And of course, Angela Rayner is laying out her package of workers' rights. So how do you see it? Is that those protections for workers something that the CBI welcomes?
Well, I think as business leaders, we are also working people. And I think one thing that a business leader said to me today is when you're working with your teams, you don't think of it as workers on the one side and business leaders on the other. We really work together with our teams to deliver what we think is really important in our businesses. But I think in the New Deal for Workers, or what is now being called Make Work Pay, I think what's important is that when we look to increase some of the rights within our economy, I think there's some things everyone is agreed on. We need more enforcement in the UK to make sure that everyone is upholding the standards that have already been set out. And when we're looking to change some of the day one right, unfair dismissal, if we see a change in some of the rights that workers have, we need to listen to businesses around some of the challenges that could be. And I think what everyone wants to avoid is unintended consequences where business leaders might be less willing to take a risk on someone when we're looking to create and grow their business. They want to be able to offer jobs. So it's really important that everyone is behind that. We sit down with unions, with business leaders to work through some of the solutions. And I think we've seen a government that's willing to listen, and now we need to see more certainty on how some of that will be implemented, but most importantly, keeping an open dialogue with business as it's implemented.
Okay, well, NewtonSmith, Chief Executive of the CBI, we really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let me just bring you a little bit of breaking news for you now. And a little bit of breaking news about Iran from the Middle East. Iran's president has accused Israel of seeking a wider war in the Middle East and laying traps to lead Iran into it. That's the latest from the Middle East. We'll get more on that a little bit later on. But in the meantime, let's take you to some news that broke this afternoon regarding Everton Football Club. The Friedkin Group, owned by the US billionaire Dan Friedkin, has agreed a deal to buy the club. So let's get the latest on this. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso is here with me. So something of a change of heart then?
Dan Friedkin, who is a US businessman, billionaire, big portfolio of interests. He inherited franchise for Toyota cars in the Gulf States, in the Gulf States of America from his father, turned that into a property, hospitality, hotels and movie empire. He agreed, was in talks to buy Everton 2 months ago, pulled out of those deals, has now announced today, the club has announced that he is in pole position to buy the shares of Farhad Moshiri, the Iranian-born current owner of the club. We don't have a number for how much he's agreed to pay for Everton, but the club is in a deep hole. It needs new ownership. He's going to have to take responsibility for more than £400 million of debt that it's incurred, some of it borrowed from another group a year ago that agreed a similar exclusivity deal to buy the club, but then couldn't come up with the money. He it's reported, has already lent £200 million to Everton during this period of exclusive negotiation. It's obviously helped him open the door to this deal. So he's going to have to take responsibility for a great deal of debt. It's understood Farhad Moshiri is going to lose most of his investment, and they're going to have to fund the biggest project Everton has got, which is a new stadium to replace Goodison Park. So he's going to have to dig Everton out of a deep financial hole, somehow complete this stadium. The fans will want investment on players. The club won its first point of the season at the weekend. They have 1 point. Raising more money is going to be tough. Remember, they had points deducted last year because they couldn't make the sums add up. They breached the Premier League's rules. Everton is one of the most venerable clubs in English football, still a great asset. These come up quite rarely, Premier League football clubs. Everton fans will be hoping that this owner is the real deal and they can stabilise the club and move on.
Yeah, one to watch really closely. Paul, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's get you up to date with some of the day's other business stories now. And a cooling of inflationary pressures could make an interest rate cut by the Bank of England more likely, according to a survey released today. The Purchasing Managers' Index suggests the UK economy is growing at roughly half the pace of earlier this year, at 0.3% per quarter. Simultaneously, the Eurozone's PMI suggests that business activity contracted in September, hitting an 8-month low. Rupert Murdoch's REA Group in Australia has made another approach for the UK's biggest online estate agent, Rightmove. It's REA's third bid and values the company at £6.1 billion. Rightmove has rejected all advances so far. And the French bank BNP Paribas has announced a deal to buy HSBC's private banking division in Germany as part of its asset management expansion strategy. The deal means the Eurozone's largest bank will manage assets in the value of over €40 billion in 2025. So let's go back now to the Chancellor's speech. And a little bit earlier, I spoke to Andy Lightford, who's chief executive of the beauty brand Space NK, who opened their biggest high street store to date over the weekend, and asked him for his thoughts on what the government needs to do to support business.
The focus needs to be on growth. There needs to be really, I think, a reduction in legislation that is inhibiting retailer and commercial ability to grow. If I look at retail in particular, the tax burden is so significant, already sits at 80% of total profits. So this is money that we can't reinvest. This is money that we can't put into growth, that we can't put into workers' salaries. And sort of removing that tax burden, there was a lot of talk about reforming rates in particular. I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see Rachel Reeves act upon the conversations that she was having with retail prior to the election and make those changes so that we can reinvest that money.
Now, among the promises made by the Chancellor today was a pledge to invest in industry, infrastructure and green energy. So joining me now from Liverpool is Darren Davidson, who's Vice President for the UK and Ireland at Siemens Energy. Very good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. So Rachel Reeves, in her speech today, talked about the importance of investment in boosting much-needed growth in the economy. As an investor in the UK, are you being offered what you need to put more money in? And if not yet, what do you want to hear?
Yeah, I think the Chancellor outlined the government's desires to grow via an industrial strategy. And it was really positive today that energy was at the forefront of that industrial strategy. So Siemens Energy in the UK, we employ over 6,000 people. And we're involved in a number of energy transition topics, from offshore wind, grid, energy security. So I think from a roadmap perspective and an investment perspective and the desire to grow, I saw it as a positive today.
Well, yes, and the government setting a lot of store, of course, by GB Energy. Are you hearing what you want to hear on that? And what do you see as Siemens' role potentially in it?
Yeah, I think from an energy secretary perspective, I think, and the desire from an energy transition perspective, the new government has hit the ground running. I think together with industry and technology companies like ourselves, we've been engaged from the first day, which I think is positive. And I think we've seen some positive movement. For example, auction round 6 for offshore wind was positive. We've got some new projects proceeding. And I think from a grid perspective, where we also have a significant amount of work, we've seen some positive investment on projects. It's very clear that The energy transition challenge is going to be difficult, but I think from a start, I think it's been a good start from the new government.
You talk about the energy transition challenge. I mean, Labour dropped that initial £28 billion price tag for GB Energy, but they are still pledging 100% clean energy by 2030. They're instead committing £8.3 billion in capital. Do you think that's enough to achieve their aims?
I think the Energy Secretary talks about a mission, and I think he's got a sort of mission to get to that objective of 2030. I think we need to get going. I think it's a significant challenge to achieve that, but I think we need to start. It's an ambition, it's a mission, and I think it's really, really important that we get some of those projects going as quickly as possible. And I think that is the challenge. How do we move? How do we get earlier momentum? And also, I would say, from a Siemens Energy perspective, it's the line of sight. It's really having that predictability of what that investment we need to make in the UK based on the pipeline of projects is, and I think that's really important from our perspective.
And you mentioned the industrial strategy that she's promised, something that was scrapped by the last government. What difference does that make to a company like you to have a strategy laid out?
Yeah, I mean, we employ over 6,000 people in the UK. We've grown our business by 1,000 people in the last 3 years, so it's really positive. We've seen significant investment in our wind business in Hull, where we now employ 1,300 people, and we've built a factory there over the last 10 years, so that's really positive. But for us to continue to invest in the UK, we need that line of sight. We need to understand what the level of investment for the energy transition will be over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years in this country.
OK, well, Darren Davidson, we really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do stay with us. Still to come here on Business Live. We'll be taking a look at how the markets have fared this afternoon.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her. Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you. So let's take a look at the markets then. And European stocks mostly finished up slightly as investors digested banking deals and the German and French manufacturing data. Meanwhile, shares in Commerzbank fell by nearly 6% today after the German Finance Ministry said it opposed a deal that would increase UniCredit's stake in the German lender. Meanwhile, here in London, the FTSE 100 ended up just over 1/3%. Talking points today include Rightmove. That was up nearly 0.8% today after news that Rupert Murdoch's REA Group has sweetened its proposed buyout by adding £200 million to its offer. On the currency markets, the pound had a pretty good day following those European PMI figures. The pound is currently trading up around 0.25% at $1.34. And finally, on the oil markets, a barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back nearly $74. So let's talk markets now with Michael Brown, who's Chief Investment Officer at Martin Currie. Good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael. So Rachel Reeves this afternoon has made a big point of striking an optimistic tone on the economy. But do today's figures, would you say, back that up? We've had the PMI figures, the Purchasing Managers Index out today. So what's that told us about the state of the economy?
Well, it's not as bad as she would like to make out, but it is, I would say, just about keeping its nose above water at this moment in time. The PMI data isn't great, but it's not a disaster. I have to say in Europe, it is poor, really poor, especially on the manufacturing side. So overall, the opportunity for her is clearly in her own hands, because if she comes up with a budget at the end of October that meets the market's expectations, which is balanced in terms of the amount she spends to the amount that she raises, then that opens the door for a big rate cut on the 7th of November from the Bank of England. OK, you talk about a rate cut, and we have had a bit more data on inflation today, haven't we, particularly regarding the service sector? Yeah, and I think the service sector is beginning to see a slowdown on that. So if we look at the overall data here, we can see it's really weighted towards restaurants, hotels, the kind of holiday leisure side, as opposed to anything else. So I'd be really optimistic that that starts to come in the autumn now, and we start to see some much better data on inflation. Again, the PMI data today suggested that service sector inflation was now down at the level of manufacturing inflation, and that's kind of like a 27-month low, and that's actually going to continue to fall further. So I'd be really optimistic about that, and therefore I'd really start to talk about a 50 basis point cut from the MPC in November. And what would that do to the economy, would you say, if they were to make that move come November? If they were to make that move, and it really depends on the Chancellor coming up with a budget that is making the markets confident and it makes the markets feel really stable. If they come up with that, it'll start to have an impact in the second half of next year. And critically, it will impact the house building sector. And critically, that's the biggest single economic drive of this government, is to build, twice the number of homes that we are building today, which would add somewhere between 0.5% to 1% to GDP each year over the rest of the term of this government.
And you say that the markets will need to hear what they want to hear from the budget. What exactly is that? Because we're getting various messages from the Chancellor. What does she need to announce in terms of policy and in terms of economic outlook at the budget to satisfy the markets?
Balance. It's all about balance. Don't spend more than you raise. So make sure that the economy is not, and the overall level of borrowing is not going to continue to grow as it is at this point in time. We've just touched 100% GDP. That should, on the forecast, start to fall as some of the measures put in place by the last government and this start to take impact. But you just can't let that figure of debt to GDP wander upwards and expect there not to be a reaction from the market. So it's all about a good balance, a good focus, and keeping it real in terms of the amount that you can borrow relative to the amount you can spend.
OK, well, we are out of time. Michael Brown, though, thank you so much for your insights on the markets this afternoon. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it from me. Emma Crosby will be here with Business Live tomorrow morning at 11:30. Coming up, though, we've got Mark Austin and Yalda Hakim for you with the News Hour. Yalda reporting from Beirut with ongoing issues in the Middle East, of course, to report on, as we understand that the Pentagon is sending more troops to the region. They'll have all the latest on that and the rest of the top stories coming up at the top of the hour.